A series of shootings took place in Ottawa at Parliament Hill on October 22, 2014. Michael Z. Half-Bibois fatally shot Corporal Nathan Cirlio, a Canadian soldier on ceremonial guard duty at the Canadian National War Memorial. He then launched an attack in the nearby Centre Block Parliament building, where members of the Parliament of Canada were attending caucuses. It was a day marked by nerves and tears, hugs and hard questions. What if there had been 3 shooters as once believed? What if the gunman had pushed his way into the room where an unguarded Prime Minister was meeting with caucus? Or into the NDP caucus room across the hall? What if he had been armed with an assault rifle? Those imagined scenarios, all the consequences profoundly worse than the actual outcome.
We turn to Samantha Hayes, who reaches out to individuals from local political parties.
We spoke with Catherine McLeod, Kamloops Thompson Caribou MP, who was at Parliament Hill during the attacks. She was able to give us an analysis of what happened that day.
So our meeting had just gotten underway, and all of a sudden there was one large bang. Certainly with that first bang, a lot of us, there's been a lot of construction going on in Parliament Hill, so a lot of us thought that maybe it's blasting, and then all of a sudden we heard sort of a massive outbreak of shooting. And so it was right outside our door, and of course all of a sudden we were able to identify that there was indeed a lot of gunfire, and it was right outside the door.
Was an attack on Parliament Hill preventable?
So I think it's a little premature to say would it be preventable, but I certainly think that there'll be an intense look at the systems and the processes in place and how we could do things better.
Remembrance Day is a memorial day observed in Commonwealth countries since the end of World War I. On this day, people remember the members of armed forces who have died in the line of duty. People across Canada will be remembering Corporal Nathan Cirlio, who died the day of the Parliament Hill attacks. Members of Parliament give their sincerities to the Canadian veterans in regards to Corporal Nathan Cirlio and the attacks that took place on October 22, 2014.
There's been an ongoing debate as to whether or not the attacks on Parliament Hill was intentional or not. Prime Minister Stephen Harper said that the incident in Ottawa was a terrorist attack. Catherine McLeod touches on this matter.
It was terrorism. If I look at the definition of terrorism, it clearly was a terrorist attack. He was going at some symbols of our country, both the National War Monument, which people call as the soul of our country, and of course the heart of our democracy. So it's clearly a despicable act, a disturbed individual, and maybe not directly ISIL connected, but it was certainly ISIL linked, and certainly ISIL or ISIS has told believers and followers to carry out these kind of lone wolf attacks.
The Criminal Code of Canada, Terrorism Section 83.01, states that the terrorist activity means an act or omission in or outside Canada. An act of terrorism is the use of violence or threat of violence to attain political, ideological, or religious goals.
Michael Z. Half-Bibois' mother said in a letter sent to Post Media that her son was mentally disturbed and that his attack was a desperate act of a man who, quote, was mad and felt trapped. The only way out was death, end quote. The federal candidate, Bill Sandu, explains his thoughts on the attacks. According to Tom McCare, the leader of the NDP party, he stated that the attacks at Parliament Hill on October 22nd was a criminal act and not a terrorism act. Do you agree with his statement?
Yes, Mr. Mulcair's position is legally correct. It reflects the law. There really is no international legal definition of terrorism. It's very soft law. And what we deal with is crimes, right? We have a criminal code in Canada. Whether you kill one person or kill multiple people, or whether you engage in a conspiracy, it's prosecuted under the criminal code, and so it's a criminal offense.
Since you agree with Mr. Mulcair's statement that the attack was a criminal act, how would you differentiate a terrorism act with a criminal act?
But there's no definition of an offense of terrorism. This is just a loaded word used by the media and politicians.
Do you think it's more of a thing of the intention of the crime that makes it a terrorism?
Well, there's certainly that is argued, but the fact of the matter is As a lawyer and as a former jurist and somebody in international human rights law, to me, the motivation is secondary. The act is the act. If you have a conspiracy to commit an offense, commit violence, if you actually commit violence and harm people or murder people, it's a crime. It doesn't matter what the motivation is. It is a harm against people, and so it should be prosecuted accordingly.
Since you believe that the attack was a criminal act, what do you think was driving Zihaf Babo to commit such a crime?
Well, I believe that I would prefer, and I think reasoned people would prefer to wait for the evidence, right? Now, he's deceased, so we will never know. I would prefer that the police investigate.
Nancy Green, Senator for BC, Government of Canada, was in caucus when the attacks took place. She gave us a detailed description as to what happened that day at Parliament Hill.
We just heard a bang, bang, and it sounded like an explosion. And then almost immediately followed by and you knew right away that was semi-automatic gunfire.
The NDP are calling it a criminal act, and the Conservatives are calling it a terrorism act. Do you think it's one or the other?
No, I think it's pure and simple an evil act.
As a senator, do you think that security measures should be wrapped up in British Columbia as well as all over in Canada?
If we become afraid and ramp up a whole bunch of security, and we become then we are really letting them win, because terrorism is about terrorizing individual people, and we can't let that happen.
The outcome of this tragic event has left the public in sadness, despair, and fear. The Parliament building has been tainted with bullet holes from the shootings. There is an ongoing debate whether or not these bullet holes should be covered or left as a historical reminder of this day. Kathy McLeod touches on this issue.
During the caucus meetings, has there been any talk or discussion about leaving the bullet holes in Parliament Hill?
I know a few people thought that maybe those bullet holes should be left because it's representing a pretty dramatic event in Parliament itself, but I think the person that I actually appreciated his response was, he said, this is the Hall of Honor, and this happened in the Hall of Honor. We don't want the Hall of Honor to have bullet holes that represent terrorist acts. Until further investigations are done, there is still uncertainty as to whether the shootings at Parliament Hill were an act of terrorism or criminal. This event has affected Canada as a whole. As Canadians, let's come together and support one another. Samantha Hayes for TRU News.